Okay, let's dive in.
Let's do it.
We're tackling a concept today that's, well, it's woven right into the fabric of our lives, isn't it? Something we talk about all the time, but maybe don't always pick apart. Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing it by taking a really close look at this single Wikipedia entry, seeing
Right.
how it defines and understands freedom in different ways.
Right. Think of this as our mission, you could say, to pull out the most interesting bits from this source material, see what layers are hiding there, maybe even challenge what we thought we knew about such a, well, fundamental idea.
Absolutely. And as you'll see, the source shows freedom is way more than just a quick dictionary definition.
Oh, yeah.
It gets into philosophy, history, politics, even surprisingly, physics.
It's incredibly multifaceted, yeah. The source takes us from that, basic meaning right through to some really subtle points and complex debates.
So let's start where the entry does. The core definition it gives is pretty direct, right? The power or right to speak, act, and change as one wants without hindrance or restraint.
Yeah, that feels like the foundation,
Yeah.
the basic idea.
The ability to do things without someone or something stopping you.
Exactly. That's sort of the first layer the source presents, this absence of external constraints. But then almost immediately the source pairs this up with liberty and autonomy.
Okay.
And there's this intriguing phrase it introduces right away, giving oneself one's own laws.
Hold on, giving oneself one's own laws. That sounds, well, it sounds like the opposite of having no restraint. How does the source square that with the basic idea of doing what you want without hindrance?
See, that's where it gets really interesting. The source seems to suggest this giving oneself laws points towards a more active kind of freedom.
Active.
Yeah, not just being like free from external blocks, but having the ability to actively direct yourself,
Yeah.
to be self-governing.
Huh.
So it's less about having no rules and more about being the source, the origin of the rules you choose to follow.
Okay, wow. That adds a whole other dimension already. And the source mentions something else quite surprising early on, too, how the word free pops up outside of human stuff, like politics or actions.
It does, yeah. The entry notes that in fields like physics and chemistry, free is used to describe something that can change, something not fixed or stuck in its current state.
Like what?
Like a free body in physics.
Yeah.
That's an object that isn't being pushed or pulled by outside forces, so it's free to move or, change its state based on its own momentum or internal stuff.
So even down at a fundamental scientific level, the idea of free links back to this ability to change, to not be bound by external things. That's actually a really neat connection the source makes.
It really highlights that underlying idea of being unconstrained,
Yeah.
allowing for movement or change.
Yeah.
Now, here's another fascinating little detail the source throws in, the etymology, where the word freedom actually comes from.
Oh.
It traces it back to an Old English word for friend.
Friend. Seriously, that seems totally unrelated to being unhindered or self-governing. What's the source say about that link? How does that work?
Well, the entry cites the Oxford English Dictionary, and it suggests the Old English root connects to dear, like referring to those close to you, part of your family or kin group, your friends.
Okay.
And this gets contrasted with the Latin root for liberty, libertas, which was apparently very much about legal status, being free versus being a slave.
Wow. So the original English sense of freedom might have been tied more to belonging, to kinship, like you're free because you're part of the inner circle, the friends, while liberty was strictly about your legal standing, not being owned.
Precisely. The source implies there's this historical echo. Maybe those inside the king group were seen as free, while outsiders or captives were the ones considered slaves. It's a pretty powerful suggestion about the social roots of the word. The source also briefly touches on freedom and philosophy and religion, linking it to the whole free will debate, the argument against determinism.
Right, right. Okay, shifting gears a little, the source also points out something pretty obvious but important, that in many modern countries, freedom is seen as a fundamental right.
Yes, absolutely. It highlights freedoms like speech, religion, the press, the big ones. And the entry does get into the political side, connecting political freedom closely with liberty and autonomy, especially seeing it as, the opposite of living under a dictatorship.
And then within civil rights, the source draws that really stark contrast, freedom versus slavery. It also notes this conflict, which the source flags between those who argue freedom has to be equal for everyone, regardless of race, religion, gender, class, whatever, and those who think, no, it should be restricted to certain groups.
Right. And it lists freedoms often discussed in that context. Assembly, association, choice, speech, the usual suspects.
This kind of brings us to a really crucial question that the source tackles directly. Are freedom and liberty just, different words for the exact same thing?
Yeah, that's a key point. The entry says they're often used interchangeably, but sometimes people make subtle distinctions.
Okay, like what?
Well, one really significant distinction the source presents comes from John Stuart Mill.
Ah, Mills. Okay.
According to the entry, Mill saw freedom mainly as the ability to do what you want, what you actually have the power to do, your capacity.
Right.
Liberty, though, for Mill, was more about the absence of arbitrary restraints. And crucially, it had to take into account the rights of other people.
Okay, let me see if I've got this. For Mill, based on this source, freedom is like your raw power, your ability to just do something. But liberty is about that power existing within a system where it's only limited by fair, non-arbitrary rules and where you respect everyone else's similar power. So it's kind of like power versus power within a just framework.
That's a good way to put it. That's the distinction the source outlines from Mill's perspective.
Yeah.
And then it introduces another really influential way people split hairs here. Isaiah Berlin's idea of positive versus negative freedom.
Ah, yes, this one. This always feels a bit backwards when you first hear it.
Yeah.
Like, negative freedom. That sounds bad, but I know that's not what it means. How does the source explain that one?
It really comes down to from versus to. According to the source, negative liberty or freedom is freedom from external obstacles.
Okay.
It's the absence of barriers, interference, coercion. The source gives examples like freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from discrimination. Think of it like clearing the path so you can move if you want to.
Okay, makes sense. So negative freedom is about the space being cleared for you, the lack of someone getting in your way, freedom from something. So what about positive freedom then?
Right. So the source elaborates on Berlin, mentioning thinkers like Charles Taylor. They describe positive liberty as the ability to fulfill one's purposes.
Oh, okay.
This connects back to that earlier idea, remember, giving oneself one's own laws, self-governance. It's not just about the path being clear that's negative freedom. It's about having the capacity, the resources, maybe the internal conditions, to actively pursue your goals on that path, to be the master of yourself, essentially.
I think I get it now. Negative is being left alone, having the space. Positive is having the actual agency or capacity to do something meaningful with that space, to achieve your goals, realize your potential.
Exactly.
The source also brings in Wendy Hui Kyung Chung, who adds another interesting layer, connecting freedom and liberty to institutions.
Yes, Chun. According to the source, she argues that liberty is really strongly tied to human subjectivity, political parties, institutions, whether they're liberal or libertarian. To have liberty, in her view, often means being liberated from something specific, but some kind of structured system.
Okay, so liberty is tied to the system, the structures. What about freedom, in her view?
Chun suggests freedom is, well, not necessarily linked to those formal institutions or parties. It might operate more through, say, unofficial networks. Maybe it's more about an internal state or a kind of diffuse capacity. To be free, maybe, is to be self-determining, autonomous, sort of regardless of the formal structures around you. And she points out, connecting back again, that physics uses freedom for objects, remember. Degrees of freedom, free bodies.
Right, the physics thing again?
Which fits better, she implies, with her idea of freedom being a more fundamental state of being able to change or move, while liberty is typically tangled up with human will and political systems.
That clicks. Freedom as this sort of basic property of being able to act or change versus liberty, which is more tied to human systems, politics, and structured liberation. Makes sense.
Exactly. And Chun's perspective, as the source notes it, helps set up what feels like a really profound paradox.
Oh.
The idea that one can be liberated,
Yeah.
yet still unfree. Or conversely, be technically free, yet still enslaved.
Wait, what? That sounds totally contradictory. How does the source explain that? How can someone be free but also enslaved? Or liberated but still unfree?
Well, the source points partly to the work of Orlando Patterson here. His argument, basically, is that the very concept and the deep desire for freedom actually originated from the experience and the longing of enslaved people.
Okay.
So in that view, the internal state, the longing for or the assertion of self-determination that could be seen as being free in spirit or mindset, right? That could exist even while someone was physically in the external condition of being enslaved, lacking formal liberty.
Ah, I see. An internal freedom despite external chains.
Right. And conversely, someone might be formally liberated, the chains removed, but still lack the internal capacity, maybe the resources, the self-mastery to be truly self-determining. So they're liberated, yet in a sense, still unfree. It suggests a deep split between an inner sense of freedom and the outer condition of liberty.
Wow. Okay, that really challenges the simple idea that freedom is just about, whether you're locked up or not. It adds this whole layer of internal state capacity, self-mastery.
It does. And finally, the source discusses this idea of freedom from domination, citing people like Philip Pettit.
Freedom from domination. What's that distinct from?
This is another really critical distinction the source makes. Domination, in this context, isn't just about someone actively interfering with you right now. It's about someone having the power to interfere with you arbitrarily.
The power to interfere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The source distinguishes between what it calls operative control, that's your ability to direct your own actions day to day, and reserve control. That's the power someone else holds in reserve to step in and mess with your actions, even if they aren't doing it right this second.
Okay, so even if I can do something right now, I have operative control. If someone else, like say, a boss who could fire me for no good reason, or a government that could just change the rules arbitrarily, if they have that power to stop me whenever they feel like it, then the source suggests I'm subject to domination and therefore not truly free in the specific sense.
Precisely. The source highlights arguments from thinkers like Pettit and also Jamie Susskind that real freedom, especially in a democracy, requires freedom from this arbitrary power, this reserve control. It's not enough just to be allowed to do things. You have to be free from the arbitrary power of others to prevent you from doing them whenever they choose.
Okay. Wow. So what does this whole journey through the source material really tell us about freedom?
We started with a seemingly simple definition, and we've ended up in some pretty deep and complex territory.
It really shows us that freedom, at least as it's explored in this source, is, well, it's far from being just one simple thing. It's more like a rich tapestry, isn't it? Woven from ideas about absence of restraint, sure, but also ability to act, self-governance, legal status, political status, even an internal philosophical state. And yeah, that property described in physics. And all those distinctions, the source highlights freedom versus liberty, positive versus negative freedom, freedom tied to institutions versus maybe something more organic.
Yeah.
And this freedom from domination, they just demonstrate how many different angles, different lenses we can use to understand this one word.
Exactly. And understanding these different facets, these historical echoes,
Right.
all drawn directly from the source material we looked at, can really sharpen how you think about freedom. Not just in some abstract way, but in the concrete realities of your own life and the world around you. It really underscores that freedom isn't static. It's dynamic. It's contested. It has all these dimensions.
Absolutely. And as we finish up this deep dive into the source, let's leave you with that really powerful idea the entry presents near the end, that apparent paradox. The idea that one can be free, yet enslaved, or liberated, yet unfree. Drawn from those historical and philosophical viewpoints within the source, what does that apparent contradiction suggest to you about the ultimate nature of true freedom? Definitely something to ponder long after this deep dive is over.